So we left it at the first session. It started with a great introduction by Charles Powell on the end of the transition paradigm by Carruthers. I think it still applies very much to the ideas that we'll be developing in this panel. Particularly I'd like to highlight two of them, which I think are quite relevant for these particular topics that we'll be tackling in a while. One of them is the idea that Powell mentioned as well about any country moving away from autocracy turning immediately into a democratic or pro-democracy country. Well, this reveals very much the first optimism that we had about the Arab revolutions and this state of mind, considering that the road would be pretty straightforward and that we will be moving coherently, progressively, regionally from one political past to a more democratic future. Well, the first optimism now, as we saw it in the first panel, has vanished more or less. Yeah, I would say has vanished pretty much. And then today we're in a much more difficult situation. This is one of them. The other idea that was and tackles very much what we'll be discussing here is the belief in the determinative importance of elections as the building block of these democracies. Yes, we see that democracies cannot happen without elections, but elections can happen without democracy. And this is something we've witnessed very recently in not only Arab countries, but elsewhere in the world. So post-Arab Spring politics has turned to be much more a bumpy road than we originally foresaw. Tunisia, and we'll be exploring this, perhaps is the model. Yes, we've seen elections turning into, more or less with its difficulties, but a democracy starting to be a consolidated democracy. In Egypt, we've seen that from elections we moved to the return of a military regime, and of course this reveals that bumpy road I was referring to. In any case, we had another very interesting debate at the beginning of the session on the role of agency versus the role of a structure, and I think that what this bumpy road reflects is the importance of these structural factors, the socio-economic conditions and the deep state parameters that need to be taken into account. So to leave my introduction here, I would say that the challenges today that we are facing, and this is what we'll be exploring now, are threefold, if not more, but at least threefold. One of them is inclusiveness. Inclusiveness is one of the key factors that needs to be brought in after the first wave of revolutions and turmoil in general. So inclusiveness, we had this very interesting conference a month ago of the Euromesco network, where Bahgat Korani, whom I'm sure you know, came to speak, and he highlighted it by drawing the Egyptian case, the confrontation, the deep confrontation that exists today between what he called the deep state and the deep society. So these structural factors defining the need for inclusiveness at a broader level, and here, of course, Egypt is a case in point. Then the second one would be accountability, and I think that we cannot talk about party politics, about electoral processes, about political systems at large without tackling the deep causes of revolutions, and these account for these accountability factors that I brought here. Of course, here are the socioeconomic grievances, the exclusion prevailing in many of these societies, and which reveals that the practice of democracy is much more important than political institutions that are behind it. So this practice of democracy in accountability terms needs to be brought in. The third one would be complexity, and here's where we'll have a presentation by Haizam Amira Fernandez, who will be speaking about these different levels of complexity that we're witnessing within the region, with countries going through turbulent times, some other ones going through more consensual paths, and in any case very different factors, both at the national but also at the regional level, present in the Arab world. So I'll throw a couple of questions here to my colleagues at the table that I hope you will be able to tackle in your presentations. First of all, what is this role? So what would you position yourselves in terms of this debate between the agency and structure by bringing in these deeper socio-economic, not only socio-economic, but these deeper conditions that are affecting the role of agency, that are affecting the role of political parties, of political leadership, but also of civil society organizations, of youth organizations, of women organizations, to what extent this structural level is really bringing or gaining much more importance today than we originally thought. Then what's the place for ideologies today? I mean, is ideology the most important factor that needs to be taken into account? Or no, perhaps it's only a question of socioeconomic conditions, of the conditions on the ground that are defining the way the processes of political change are developing. Third, what is happening with elite change? Are we really changing elites in the Arab world, or basically what we see is the predominance of former elites in a different shape, in a new shape? And then last but not least, and Narcis Serra will be speaking about this, what's the role of armed forces within this agency, this important agent in many countries, and particularly in Egypt. So without any further ado in terms of introduction, I will give the floor directly to Haizam Amira Fernandez for about a quarter of an hour, if that's okay, and then we'll move to the different case studies in Egypt, Libya and Tunisia. Thank you very much, Haizam. The floor is yours.